Hello, friends and family and keepers of the faith, to Blog 24, dated the 7th of the 8th, 2022. Well, it's been an interesting week. It's been a lovely day today, or the start of it anyway. We haven't finished with it. And I've hit the record button, and I can say that I did a little bit more prep last night than I did the previous weeks, but not that much. So it's going to be in the same sort of format as it's been before. But there's been more activity from me this week, so maybe it'll be a little bit more entertaining. I don't know. I must admit, the first thing that goes through my mind is is what I do entertaining? I have no idea. What I do know is that I do like talking to someone, and in this particular instance, it's something, which is the camera and the microphone. It does sort of like clear my palate for the rest of the week. So before I move forward, we do things in a certain order. We'll get the news out of the way because I find it the most uninteresting part of things. But this week there have been a few things that I do have an opinion on. It alters nothing, but I do have an opinion. So we start off with the war. These are just headlines and bits and bobs that I picked up. Russian soldiers are accusing superiors of jailing them for refusing to fight. So, unusually in news reports that I've been reading, it's all been about Ukraine, 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 Ukraine. This one is actually the Russians themselves. It sort of goes on to the next headline, which I read up about, which was Ukrainian offensive have fought back and forced Russia to bolster troops in the south. So if they're trying to bolster troops in the south, they're trying to recruit more. If the Russians don't want to fight, they're being jailed. I dare say this is familiar territory in wars. I mean, I can't talk about World War One, World War Two, or much really about Vietnam, other than what I studied at school and what I've watched on documentaries. But have been around for the Falklands and a few other things. And when these things go on and on and on, and when it's the politicians themselves that basically force these wars to start, you can imagine there is a disarray in regards to people that are in the army and then having to recruit more because of lost troops. All I know is I want the war to end. This is having an awful effect for everybody involved, including the Russians, including the Ukrainians. The cost of living is going up. The ports and everything are in disarray because they can't get the goods to each country that's needing them. That means that we're all facing bottlenecks for types of things that we need. So let's have this war end, shall we? And the biggest news article that I think is probably worldwide and has been mentioned across the globe is about poor Archie Battersby. Now, if you're not familiar with Archie Battersby's story, he's a poor boy, poor lad that suffered an injury, and they finally turned his life support system off on the 6th, so a couple of days ago. And but before that occurred, there was a huge turn of events that I've had certain opinions on. Not that my opinion matters, but it's one that crops up a number of times that these things happen. Now, what happened in regards to Archie is that the doctors basically could only assume what's happened to Archie. because they could only do an MRI scan, and they basically looked at the problem as being brainstem. But of course, the family didn't want brainstem test to be done. You can understand that a little bit, because if there is brainstem death, then you end a person's life pretty much at that point. So there were flickers of life from Archie, and to be quite honest, the family are always going to have an emotional aspect to their lad, like anybody would do. So they saw flickers of life, went to their own church, got petitions and everything, because they just believed that extra time would heal him. So it went to the courts, and the courts agreed that it was brainstem death from the moment of the MRI scan, which dated it as being around about the beginning of June, I believe. Then we go to the courts and appeals, to the point where I then start getting a little bit agitated, because at the very end, the family were fighting in the courts when they should have been spending time by the bedside of the lad. And the final nail on the coffin, where I have an opinion, is that they wanted to move the lad to a hospice to spend his final hours with his family, and not around the hospital, which had tried to maintain life as best as possible, but couldn't do anything, and didn't want the disruption of all of the hospital noise and clatter around, and wanted to spend his final hours at rest in a quieter place. And the courts got involved with that and said no. And in fact, it's being turned off now that you've reached the very end, that the courts can have any control on this. And lo and behold, on the 6th, the life machine was turned off in the hospital and not at the hospice. Now, everybody wants to meet their own death the way that they want to. They said that they couldn't move the body to the hospice because it would be too dangerous. And I'm thinking to myself, you already want to turn the machine off. Why can't you give that one thing to the family so that he could be moved? Now, I'm no doctor. Other people are going to have a different opinion than me. But I would have thought the last wish of the family to have the poor lad moved to a secluded area as best as possible wouldn't have been a bad thing, because turning the life machine off would have meant that he would have died anyway, unless they knew something different, where they think that turning it off he would survive for days. But the whole point of turning the machine off was so that he could die naturally. So whether it would be a day, an hour, I don't know. I'm disjointed from it, because the emotional aspect of it for me is from an outsider's point of view, which is why I'm saying my opinion makes no difference on this. But from my point of view, they fought for the best with an emotional aspect, and I would have thought that the last thing they fought for, which was just to move them to a secluded place, a bit more solitude, not in the hospital that had caused, so much heartache for them, would have been given, but it wasn't. That's the end of my. That's just my opinion. Whichever way you look at it, rest in peace, Archie, is all I can say about that. Such a sad tale. So, like I say, I tried to do things in different orders, but I'm going to do the shout outs and the questions next, because then it sort of gauges more a little bit about time, about what things that I want to talk about. So a few shout outs, because I like to give these out, because these people are the people that have commented. These people are the people that have asked me a question. These people have are filling my family with idea and aspirations and answers to questions so that they understand how my brain ticked. My family won't do that. They don't know. They'll be looking at these videos later on or when I'm gone. So you guys are helping. So shout outs to Martroid, Wee Bob R, Robert's Retro Gaming, Steve's 8-Bit Gaming, Colin Jones, Jambon, Panther UK, Milfy Swimbuckle, Colin Ferguson, and Cauldron of Stardust. Few less than normal, but nevertheless, it's the quality that matters. And every single one of them has commented. Some of them have raised questions. So these are not in any order, by the way. I don't try to put these in alphabetical order. It's how, when I open up my YouTube comment section, it's the order that they're listed. So Wee Bob Arndt has asked a question. Lovely to get a question from Bob. And he's asked, what games have I not wanted to put down? So that's a tricky question, because if you know, my game playing goes back so far, and there must be no end of times when I was before a teenager playing even Pong, where I've gone to my parents and gone, no, I don't want to stop, I want to continue playing, or whatever. All the way to the point now where I'm a little bit more like Mainmeister, more of a historian than playing games. But even now, there are games where I'll start something off, get so involved, look at the clock, and it's like 3 o'clock in the morning, and go, what? Where the hell's my day gone? How am I going to get any sleep? Because I've got to get up in the morning, and that means I'm going to get 4 hours or 5 hours sleep, and I'm going to feel like crap the next day. But I have to give an answer. So what game have I not wanting to put down? Well, I can turn around and say that I played Elite to death. These are all common games, though, that everybody knows that when people got into Elite, they either loved it or hated it. And if you loved it, you played it to death. And the biggest time where I didn't know I'd lost so much time were massively multiplayer online role-playing games. And I only ever played really one of those, and that was the Guild Wars series. So I can tell you now, at the very start of buying Guild Wars, I did not want to put that down. I was getting further and further and further in, leveling up, and there were little side things that you could do that meant nothing in the game. You know, it was more like growing crops or something, so that you could make bread so that you could eat on another journey, or whatever it is. You know, that little crafting element. And I would do those right at the end, and then look at the clock and go, oh shit, I've got work in the morning. I really ought to have started a little bit earlier before my tea or something. But I hope that answers your question. There are many, many times, though, Bob, I could be playing an arcade game, and I would just want to get that one more score that would increase things. So, multitudes, Bob. I'm not the greatest game player in the world. I admit that I take the piss a little bit out of Mainmeister, but only because it's sort of like a running gag. I'm sure he's better a lot of games than I am, because he at least forces himself to play games on a Sunday. I don't. I just stand here chatting or watching. I'm not doing. So what are my skills going to be like? Not particularly great. All I can tell you is what I was like when I was actually fully into playing games and buying consoles and sitting down and actually doing something with them. Okay, so Robert, who's got his own channel, he's doing incredibly well on his channel. I'm very bemused, and religiously watch his gameplay on Atari stuff. He's actually revisiting certain stuff now, um, but that doesn't mean that he's not moving forward with new stuff. Um, he wanted to know what was my first foray into PCs. Let me just get a drink. I do apologise. It's a very warm day today. Thank you for that. What was my first foray into PCs? And again, because it's such a short question, it could mean so many things. Because, I mean, we didn't really have PCs at school. They were, they were the Apple IIe's and Commodore PETs. But when I consider a personal computer is what we consider now the form factor that IBM probably started back in the day. So when I left school, went on a YTS, I worked for a firm called GKN Auto Parts. It's very strange, this, because they didn't take me on after the year, but I went round all their departments to see how the company ran. And for the greatest amount of time, I was in the department that produced microfiches. I don't know if anybody knows what a microfiche is, but we used to take pictures of invoices or paperwork and all that sort of stuff. But there seemed to be dumb terminals on everybody's desks that was doing office type work, and they had IBM XTs. Now, the introduction of the IBM XT is probably well documented, but I know it had a 8088 processor in it, and these computers are all networked up, and it's where I got a little bit of network knowledge. I don't know whether they were on a ring network with terminal ends and all sorts of stuff, and I'm not quite sure what type of network they were on and who controlled it. But I do know that some of them were dumb terminals because they had no drives. The first thing I noticed about them was they had green screens. They were big, bulky things, and there were no disk drives. And therefore there were network connections to them. But moving on from that, my first PC was a very vanilla thing which I built. But the processor inside that was an SX25, and it was a 386. So I didn't, when the numbering started to come in, the 286, 386, 486, and so forth, I started off with a 386, and it was an SX, and it was an SX25. And as soon as I put it together, I knew I'd chosen the wrong chip. It was just so slow. So the person I was getting all the bits from, I said, could I swap it out and pay the difference between the boards? For which we then kept a relationship like that together for about 5 or 6 years. So I suddenly went to a DX50, and then a DX100, and then started down the Pentium line, and the Pentium line were cartridge chips. So the form factor of where the processor went into changed, and I had a Pentium 2. The hertz went up all the time. I learned more about bus speeds and bottlenecks and all sorts of stuff, until we're up to where we are now with the classes system of i3, i5, i7, i9, and obviously the alternate route for non-Intel chips. I think they're called Ryzen now. And I've basically kept swapping out and swapping out and swapping out until there was a point where I needed a bigger case and a bigger power supply and a new motherboard. As soon as you got to the point where you needed more power, and you were constantly battling that because you'd buy a new graphics card first, and that would require another 6-pin connector added to it, on top of the power it would take from the motherboard. So, it was about every 2 years I was swapping and changing until I got to about 2014, where I've sort of calmed down a little bit, and things that I've been buying now are either been given to me rather than me starting again. So I hope that answered that question, because I've sort of like given you a bit of glimmer into the future as well, and where I am with my PCs today. My most powerful PC really now is my laptop, which I don't use very much, which I showed the other week, which is a dual screen laptop with an i9 processor in it. But the PC I'm on at the moment, if anybody wants to know, it is an i7. And it has a lot of RAM, and it's got an SSD drive in it. It's a 2013, 2014 i7 processor, which would make it 4th or 5th gen. Not particularly great. In fact, you couldn't even upgrade to Windows 11 if you were to follow Microsoft's upgrade plan of too old a processor. So that answers that question a little bit. Steve, now, good old Steve, like Steve. Hands of Death Steve, I call him now that he dies so much in his own games that he likes to play. He's great. He's asked a couple of questions, and I didn't answer one the previous week, so I do apologise, Steve. I'm going to answer it now. He wanted to know what my favourite TV detective is, and he mentioned whose his is. Problem with him is that I've come to learn with Steve that we're sort of alike. Now, he mentioned his favourite detective, and his matches mine. So if you wanted to know, it's Columbo. Now, Columbo went on for 10 or 11 seasons. Started off as a drama or a film of the month over in the States, and Spielberg even directed one of his shows, until it turned into a series where there would be a number of these. So it used to be like a one-off year thing, or one-off every 6 months type drama. And Columbo was always one of those characters where the structure of the story was always that the watcher, or the person, like myself, that's watching, sees the crime and know who did it. And the whole idea of the story is that you watched Columbo pick up the clues and then pinpoint who it was in the very end. And it was always the chase that was entertaining. Now, I can never pinpoint really the point where Columbo goes, yes, I know exactly who it is. But it's usually generally very early on, and he just drags it out a little bit till he gets his man or his woman. So if I was to give a second character... Oh, no, before I leave about Columbo, it's very interesting that there was a number of years back when I was really into Columbo that I wanted to find out what his first name was. Now, when I started to look on the internet, a lot of people have deliberated on what his name is. Now, people have took a snapshot of a screen because he sometimes had to wear a badge and all sorts of stuff. I believe his first name is Frank, but I do not know for definite. If you know, Steve, please comment. But if I was to name a second character, it'd be Quincy. Quincy is one of those shows where there's more science and medical behind him, and causes highlighted that are still going on now. Things that we can do, things that we can't do. The law is an ass, in other words. And there was something about Quincy. It's probably this authority figure type thing. He had greyish hair. He was well known in his industry for autopsies. But the one thing about it is he could not go on in real life. This guy would do an autopsy, and all of a sudden he was in a car going around everywhere trying to work out the cause of death, leaving other people behind to do all the dog's body work. He had this famous assistant called Sam Fujiyama, and I swear he treated him like a slave. You know, I mean, we're talking. Can you do all this blood work for me while I go off and have a nice sandwich and go to the bar and have a drink and talk to all these people? Thanks very much, Sam. I'm off. You know what I mean? And I'm going, you can't do that. But without Quincy, you wouldn't have the CSIs, and you wouldn't have a number of shows. They started off with Quincy. He went on for, again, 8, 9 seasons. We're talking years. And I immensely loved the show. Not only the fact that I don't know how he got all these young women, but they were all 20 years his junior, and they were all air stewardesses and stuff. And he lived on a boat. Wow. Wish I had the money. That's all I can say. So Steve also says, if I could code a game, what would I code? What genre would I code in? And that's a difficult one because I'm not a coder. And if I was going to code a game, I should think it would be a shoot 'em up. And I would probably go down the route that many would do, which is write routines that I would then append together into one big thing. Excuse me. So I think it would be the shoot 'em up genre, and I would probably clone something first, something that's been done before, and then write something new. I would definitely would not probably release something until it was something that I considered to be more new than copied, you know, plagiarism and all of that. So I hope that answers that. And then he opened up Foodgate. Oh, Steve, are you trying to kill me? I mean, trying to get over Panther's Foodgate, and you started. But unfortunately, I missed your Foodgate question from last week as well. So I've got 2 Foodgate things going on. Okay, so you wanted to know, do I prefer HP brown sauce or Daddy's brown sauce? Oh, God. Well, it's not a story, but you live by what your family get you. And we used to have HP sauce at home. When I moved away from home, lived in Manchester, I preferred Daddy's. And then when I moved back, it's back to HP again. Both of them are nice. But the longest period of time of brown sauce that I've had on my dinners has been HP. So that's the answer to that one. But I like them both. And then you wanted to know donuts last week. You gave me 2 options when there were actually probably more. And you said, do I prefer custard donuts or cream donuts or jam donuts? Neither really. I'm actually a ring donut or plain donut type guy. But I have to say that I would go with jam donut probably over custard. And the reason for that is I've had custard for years because my dad worked at General Foods. Birds, it was called Birds back then. It's Jacob Souchard now. And my dad bought custard powder. We never made donuts, but my dad made the best custard. Oh, he knew how to get that powder, you know, how to make custard from scratch. And when you put that in a donut and you buy it off of a shelf, it's just not the same. You can get away with it, I think, with jam, but certain consistencies of custard taste not nice. So that answers that. And Foodgate, I don't mind if you guys are happy. It's just that I don't know quite, you know, I'm a big stocky bloke talking about food all the time. No wonder he's a fat person. But carry on. And then we've got Panther. Well, we all know about putting his big, well, no, look, he hasn't got a big head. He's so slick at what he does, and he's so knowledgeable that I put in a little joke that he's got a big head, and he can't fit through doors and all that sort of stuff. I mean, the other alternative is that I've noticed that when he's on camera, he's very light, very pink. Does that make him the Pink Panther? Right, there we are. We've got a new one for you. You are the rinky-dink Pink Panther. That's it from now on. He wanted to know... You know I love your Pink Panther. And I nearly said Pink Panther then. He wanted to know one thing that I've stopped myself getting to save cash in relation to PC. And I don't think I've ever done that. I've always managed to save and get what I want. I'd like to buy a new PC because this one is a bit old now. There have been parts that I've compromised. Like when I was doing all of my scanning of comics to clean them up for digitizing, I bought a graphic tablet. Now, I'd really loved to have had a graphic tablet by Wacom or whoever that was A4 and had a transparency sheet over it and be able to do all of that and an immense amount of things that you can do with a tablet and a pen. But they were bloody expensive and I could only afford those A5-ish type pads, you know. So I compromised, you know, and always had the one below the A4 and so forth, because I hadn't got £1,000 or £500 for something that I could possibly get away with on a smaller platform. So I would say that's the answer to that, Panther. I've never really stopped myself getting something if I wanted it and there was a way that I could get it, I'd get it. So hopefully that answers that. Now the next one is always Milfy. He's the last one because his is always quite complex and his questions are usually quite long. So I'm going to read them out. First one. Milfy, by the way, thank you for your questions. Which game or games have you completed or done particularly well at that have given you the most satisfaction and now you look back on with fond memories? And I think I've answered it really in the fact that I spent an immense amount of time on Guild Wars. And I did get to the end of all of the standard missions and did as many of the side quests as possible. So I'm going to alter tact and give you a real-time strategy game that I just couldn't put down, and I completed it over a weekend because I was just enamored by it, and that was Supreme Commander. And that game, Supreme Commander, is not well liked. I just found, for some unknown reason, something in it that mesmerized me, and I wanted to know what the next mission was going to be, and there were only like 20 or so. I've played it over and over again, and if you go to my Steam library, you'll see that I've put, I think, nearly 100 hours into it, or more. But Guild Wars, obviously, you play over years, so the hours in that would be 50 times that. So, but Supreme Commander is one where I've gone back to now and again, and I've had immense enjoyment and fondness for that game. And the next question, and the last one: if you found out that the life you live wasn't real, e.g. my brain is in a vat or stuck in the Matrix, an NPC in a computer game, or a pawn played by some god, etc., would your view of life change, ? Or would you be like me and say, sod it, this is the reality I find myself in, so this is the reality I'm going to live in, and I'm not gonna worry, and I'm just going to contend with it? Very interesting, but it's one that's covered a lot in science fiction. And what I mean by that is that I read a comic once in Fantastic Four, and it was a John Byrne story where they were captured. But you didn't know this. The story started with what seemed like the Fantastic Four had retired, and basically they were living in an idyllic village. They knew they had powers, but didn't know how they got them. but then the characters around them started to act a little bit weird and give sort of clues to their past existence, to the point where they then suddenly realized that they were trapped in a machine. They were strapped to some sort of like medical table, and Doctor Doom, which was the character, had captured them and put them there to live out their lives so that he could then take over the world. So that's similar to what you're saying about brain in a vat and all of that sort of stuff. And from that point of view, I have to ask myself with your question, does something slip up to make me think that I'm trapped? We all could look at ourselves as thinking that the Earth isn't real. We're a lab experiment. It's just that we always think of ourselves as being the one all and only all in our own lives, and don't really think about what's going on somewhere else that much. So are we a lab experiment? So knowing the very nature of the fact that the only people that can answer that is somebody that discovers something doesn't make you second guess your own existence. So my answer is I'd be a bit like you, really, Milfy. I'd say sod it and live it how I am, because unless I'm constantly questioning my own existence and where we all come from, I'm going to live out my life the way that I've been brought up on. So I hope that answers your question, and that really answers every question that came out this week. You know, just want to say thanks to everybody, Cauldron and his mother, and everybody else. And we then usually move on to what I've been doing or watching and so forth, and what I've bought and so forth. But there's a lot that's gone on this week. So I watched all you guys on YouTube, absolutely fantastic. Steve's got it celebrated, by the way, with his 50th subscriber. I sometimes look at myself when I do that and go, I've been doing this now for quite a few weeks and I've got literally only 2 more than him or something. But I shouldn't look at it that way. It's just that I do like to entertain, and I do like to get a different perspective which new subscribers would bring in. But I'm quite happy with what I've got, really. And the next day when I've reset my life again, when I've reset myself, I don't look at it like, oh, why's he got this and I've only got that? So well done, Steve, on his 50th. And he did a nice hour-long stream for that. He's thinking also of moving live. I'll come across that in a moment. And of course, I've been watching Robert and his Atari gameplay, Mainmeister with his waffles, and Arcade Perfect My Arse videos. Panther, I believe, at the time that I'm recording this, he will have probably put out a Sid show, which will be a nice little one piece of music that he's manipulated. We're patiently awaiting his Sid show with his friends, Mainmeister and so forth. And I believe that's not far away now, because I had a little chat with him, and he is finally putting his slick edges around everything. And of course, Rabbit has been doing his own stuff. He did some Pac-Man stuff this week and some role-playing stuff this week. So there was a hell of a lot for me to watch this week. On TV, I watched one show, really, and that was something called The Newsreader. And the thing about dramatization is there has to be a hook for me to make it work. You know, I like news stuff, but The Newsreader is Australian, so I shouldn't normally sort of like really get so involved in it, because drama is drama, and BBC and ITV are huge full of that, and there are so many genres in the American stuff that you get on Netflix that basically entertain you. But it was about a news agency, the number 6 news in Australia, and what was going on at the time. And that's the thing. It started off, and this is easy to get me trapped into a show. It started off with how the news was broadcast and what was going on in the newsroom around Challenger and the explosion of the shuttle. And of course, then you see their lives develop along the next story. And there were many stories as you progress through this show, and it's covered a number of social things that were going on. Like how women news readers were portrayed as dollies or pieces of fluff, and that proper newscasting was becoming more an antique in many ways, in how comedy has happened in regards to how the young ones brought in a fresh type of comedy in the old style of stand-up comedians like Les Dawson and Ken Dodd were phased out and were considered old and antiquated. Newsreaders were exactly the same, unless you had the body of an Adonis. It didn't matter whether you were a newsman or not. You read out from an auto cue, and that's what people wanted to see: a fresh face, a smile, a different hairstyle, that sort of stuff. And it was less about the news for them. So I watched that, and it's a good show. It's only 6 episodes, 50 minutes each, and it's won awards, and they're doing another one right now. In fact, they started filming last month. So things I've done. Okay, so this week I've reviewed Vector Wars. Go and have a look at that if you wish. I've done less output this week because I've been doing something else, which I'll explain in a moment. So I've installed OBS. Well, there's one of the things that has taken me away from doing some game stuff. I've installed OBS finally, and started to learn things like noise gates, noise suppression, sources, etc. And I'm still getting my head around it a little bit. And then I did my first transition in Adobe, so I got two bits of video and transitioned between the two frames by adding a keyframe and a wipe. Enjoying that. It's going to be a long haul, but I've started to make stuff. I sorted my game codes from some of my bundles and put them into Discord. Please go and have a look at the Steam channel in the Discord. They're all there for you. I just hope you get enjoyment out of them. They are all doubles. I'd just like you to, if you didn't even want them, please give them to somebody else. Most codes do have a life expectancy on those things, so it would be appreciated if they went somewhere rather than I bought them for no reason whatsoever. I cleared my synthesizer and started to play. Yes, over a period of time I've been clearing back there more than here, which is why things don't look so different. But I can now reach the keys on my keyboard and play Moonlight Sonata again and a number of other things, and start doing some stuff on my keyboard. I still got a number of things that I've got to cover away from where I would sit, because at the moment I'm having to stand, which is not the best way to play the piano, I can tell you now. But that was another little win this week. I wasn't very well this week though. I was sick on Monday and Thursday. On Monday it was just another day lost, and Thursday was another day lost as well, where I got up, I was giddy, the blurry vision and cross-eyed vision would not go away even after taking the tablets. It's a concern to me. The doctors don't think it's a concern. It could be that I was dehydrated, but I try to drink water before I go to bed, so it could be lack of sleep. It might be sleep deprivation, because I am waking up every couple of hours. I cancelled, unfortunately, an arcade visit to Milton Keynes, which I was going to do on Thursday. Now, just to put some retrospective on this, I'm always thinking about what I can do in the blog. And in the blog, I was going to go to an arcade place called Pixel Bunker. It's $13.99 for 3 hours, and they've got over 100 old arcade machines. And I was thinking, oh, now Milton Keynes is only about 35 miles away from here. It's under an hour drive. And therefore I could have gone there, spent 3 hours, recorded some footage. I'd have been by myself, so you wouldn't have seen me play again, which is a shame. But I'd have I'd have gotten out of the house and done something different is the thing. But on Thursday, as you know, I felt sick, so I'm glad I didn't book it. It is every Tuesday, Thursday, and every weekend. So I've got a chance of going again on Tuesday or going again this Thursday. The weekend I'm usually spending time with my mother, a lot more, doing the shopping and prepping for this blog. So that's pretty much for things I've done this week. I hope that was entertaining. A lot more than I normally do. So what did I buy this week? Only one thing came through. Steel Book of Heat. A good film, not fantastic, but it had a couple of actors in there, Al Pacino and Robert De Niro, which, if anybody has ever watched film, they mesmerise. Their presence is known in the lens, is what I really want to say about that. But it's a Michael Mann film, and he's very diversive with people that watch a lot of films. I prefer a lot of his early work than what he's done now, but he's done one thing just recently, I think, which I showed before, which was pretty good, and that's the only thing that came through. So then I usually, oh no, sorry, haven't talked about comics for a long time, but I finally got my Amazing Spider-Man Omnibus number 5, which means now that I have got in omnibus form Spider-Man from Amazing Fantasy 15 all the way through from 1 to issue 180 plus the annuals. Look at that cover. That's what they call a Romita Kane cover. One doing the pencils, one doing the inks and final touches. That to me really shines Romita more than Kane. But oh my God, if you wanted drama or something, that's shown in that one picture. And then we talk about my big box stuff, don't we? So nothing much. As remember, I can only show you the big boxes that I've got here. I've got a lot more, but they're in storage because the ones that are in storage were so old that I considered that I probably wouldn't play them on my modern PC. So I only kept the ones that I thought that I could get to work. And when you figure about my setup, by the way, I've got 3 PCs set up on my network and I've got 2 monitors. I've got a very old XP, this one. I've got a Windows 8 down here, which is a full tower in a armor case. So if anybody knows a bit about armor cases, they're solid like metal cases. And then I've got a Cooler Master case down here, which has got my latest and the one that I use the most, and that's got Windows 10 on it. So we've got 10, 8 and XP, and of course I've got my X-Arcade trackball stick for when I want to play on MAME, but this is connected to the XP machine, and the XP machine at the moment won't go onto that monitor. So I need to fix that, and then I'll be able to play Ghosts and Goblins again. Because I really want to get back into playing some games. But anyway, let's talk about this. Theme Park World. Big box. Bullfrog again. Now, I obviously had the other theme parks, Theme Hospital, you know, etc. And I did get quite a lot of enjoyment out of this. Slightly different look. You can see it's newer. It's almost like their Populous and then Populous World that I showed. Populous at the beginning. They were going really now for the 3D aspect. But like any of these Tycoon and World and type games, there's a big learning curve and a lot of micromanagement. Throne of Darkness. played this one a lot to death as well. More a Diablo type game. Haven't shown too many of those types of games, but Sierra did a number of these. This one I played quite a bit. I don't know if it was because of the Japanese aspect of it, but there was something about it that I really wanted to get into. What does it say here? PC CD-ROM for Windows ME 98, 95, 2000 NT4. So we are going back a number of years on that one. And then a really old game, and the box is very battered. Rise of the Triad, Dark War. You can see it's the old Doomish engine. I did buy a number of Doom clones, but Rise of the Triad I had a lot of fun with. And there was probably another reason for me getting it. Maybe it had an editor in it. Maybe there was a number of add-ons. Not quite sure. The box doesn't tell me much when I look inside it on whether, you know, because it was on floppy, on whether there was something extra that I wanted from it. Because Duke Nukem was probably more in people's thoughts. Now, I just want to gently touch upon a topic that I wanted to do, but I've really run out of time. I want to run something past you on what used to be enjoyable for me, still is enjoyable, but whether we should be thinking slightly differently. And that is the rating system. The rating system for doing comparison videos annoy me at the moment. And they only annoy me in a good way, if you see what I mean. Don't get me wrong. Anybody that does a comparison video has spent an awful lot of time. And what I mean by that is that we don't know now whether people are running things on Mister's emulation or real hardware. And some people would go, does that really matter? And I would go, no, it really doesn't. But if you're going to do a game and you're going to do it across multiple systems, how do you know if that emulator can emulate all the hardware or the sound properly? Even with the Mister, which I'm sure Steve will turn around and appreciate here. He did his hour-long stream on an MSX, and he was finding some graphical artifacts coming on that you really don't know would have happened on that particular game on the real hardware or not. Now, if you were doing a comparison of that game across the others, and that graphical artifact, it would knock your rating down. Should we therefore have come up with a rating system for emulation? Question. That's the first one. Second one is, should we really do comparisons at all other than for entertainment reasons and not come up with an end and say which one is better? Because if you throw in a machine like the X68000, you've got your answer. It's always going to be the winner, apart from the main source, which is the arcade. Should something be penalised, you see, that was coded 2 years after all of the major releases for that particular game on a handheld system? So the Game Boy's got no choice but to scroll. But if you're looking at arcade accuracy, you'd say the arcade never scrolled, so bang. It's that sort of thing that I loved comparison videos, but not because of the rating that was going to happen at the end. It's because I wanted to know what the version looked like on that handheld. No other reason. So comparisons to me was something that I literally spent most of my time searching YouTube for, because they were fun. But the more I look at them now, and the more I see people trying to do a rating for them, one in particular that happened today was RetroCord did, I think, Time Scanner, and I'm going, seriously? There are a couple of years between some of these releases, and you're mentioning things like 5 frames per second on a Commodore 64, and I'm going, have you done any research on this? Frames per second? You can get a frames per second figure for a Commodore 64, but you certainly wouldn't do it on a scrolling game like that. Plus, like I say, they're coded differently, and the source, you know, is an arcade machine again, and can you really turn around and criticise because the Spectrum didn't have a 128 version out at that time, and so therefore has no tune, so therefore you're going to blast it. Plus, he mentions things like, this is really bad because look, the ball stops at this one. He tilted the table. That stops the ball. You've got to look at things in hindsight, and I don't think a lot of people do that these days. There's another podcast which is Zap Blast of the Past or something. I was listening to one of their podcasts, and they said that Ghosts and Goblins, when it came out, should have got no more than 60% because the graphics didn't look the same, the tune is totally different, the levels are shorter, and you don't have all of them on there. So how can it have got a silver award? Anybody that was around in 1986 that played that game knew that was a top-notch game and was as close as you were possibly going to get without it being a multi-loader, and using codes and techniques that we only know now, not back then. So please look at things in a retrospective and start thinking about what was around. You have to clear your brain and say, I've never seen Whizball in my life when this game was being developed. That's what you've got to do when you do a retrospective. Okay? So that's my opinion. What yours is, I don't know, guys, but that's the end of my blog for this week. I hope you found it entertaining. I really do appreciate any comments and questions that come through. One of the big news that I'm doing is that now I've got OBS on there, now that I've got some transitions starting to work, I'm going to try going live. What am I going to do going live? I'm not sure. You can have an opinion of that. I know that Martroid has commented on what he'd like to see. I think the first ones are probably going to be a long play game from Steam or something. I really would like to get Panther or Mainmeister or anybody that would like to join me for a chinwag on. That'll be a little bit down the line. I've learnt an awful lot trying to go live. Take it like this. I didn't know that I had to request going live on YouTube and then had to wait 24 hours before it would allow me to connect my account to a different system. So that screwed me this weekend. But with that bombshell, and no, there is no Stig anymore, I will leave you and hope you have a great week, and hopefully see you next weekend. Bye-bye.